Rachel is the perfect person to have read that passage. That was so great. The actual reading that I was going to have her do is like twice as long, but I'm showing mercy, you know? Good morning, everyone. The peace of Christ be with you. Thank you. I have to tell you, last week, my wife, Kristen, and I made an incredible discovery. It was the 4th of July weekend, and we had gone to bed somewhat early on the actual 4th of July, pre-nighttime, like pre-dark outside. We were in bed and asleep. And so the next day, we were feeling a little disappointed with ourselves for our lack of adventurousness on the 4th of July. So we thought, we need to get out of the house and do something fun. So we went down to Santa Cruz the next day. We've got a few coffee shops we love there and some restaurants. So we went down, and the most important thing that we wanted to do there was to see the ocean, because I don't know about you, but for us, whenever there is like even the smallest bit of discontentment in our world, the ocean feels like it cures it. Like just seeing the ocean is the antidote to that. So we had our coffee, we had our lunch, and we made our way to Natural Bridges Beach, which was in like the prime time of the day. It was stunning. People were out and like running around and soaking up the sun. The tides were like at their beautiful, hypnotic place in the day. And maybe most awe-inspiring that day in particular, all of the birds were out. We watched pelicans soaring and like diving down towards the wave and then flying back up. We watched cormorants lining the cliff and then taking dives into the inside. And then, nestled on some spongy little plants on the hillside, we saw the most beautiful chicks we had ever seen in our entire lives. They had a pattern that it's like a snow leopard. It is the most beautiful bird we had ever seen, and they would kind of like that precious little chirp. They would waddle around, and then there were 3 of them that would cuddle up next to each other for warmth. And so we're watching these beautiful birds, wondering what kind of rare exotic species we had stumbled upon when we looked them up online. And does anyone know what this is? It's a seagull. Yep, that's a seagull. Yep, that's what they look like when they're young. We could not believe that the world's most average, common bird, maybe most annoying bird, was this beautiful when it was a young chick. But aging can change a creature, can it not? And as we left and we started to walk back to our car, still kind of in disbelief that seagulls were our new favorite animal, and with full hearts from a day of watching these birds, my wife looked at me and said, "We spent our whole day watching birds. I think we're getting old." I was like, yeah, I think we are. That's a bit of what today's passage is about. In a way, it asks us, what if we could grow young instead of growing old? I love the passage that we're looking at today because it's so weird, and because it's one that at first read through, you kind of wonder, how could this ever relate to my life a little bit? Like, we don't really have leprosy nowadays. We're not really looking to buy cures in that sort of way. But if we dig a little deeper, there's a lot here for us. It's a passage that shows us 3 types of people: those who meet God, those who miss God, and those who mirror God. So first up, we meet a guy named Naaman, right? The passage opens by telling us that Naaman is the supreme military commander for the army of the king of Aram in Syria. He's highly regarded. The text describes him as a valiant soldier, but immediately it gives us this other important detail, that Naaman has leprosy, a disease that causes your skin to rot and decay. And then it says one random day, this young Jewish girl, one of Naaman's slaves from one of his army's conquests, was serving as a maid in his house. And this Jewish girl tells Naaman's wife that there's a prophet in Israel who could cure Naaman. So Naaman tells the king, and the king is like, by all means, go get cured. And he packs up a little letter that says, "Dear King of Israel, heal my general, please." Signed, the king of Aram, and he sends him off with it. And Naaman takes the letter, and he takes his influence and his power and his pomp and his prominence, and he arrives in Israel to purchase a cure. He brings this huge posse of servants and cadets, and he hands the king of Israel this letter, and the king panics. Because the king of Israel thinks that this is a ploy on behalf of the king of Aram to stir up trouble so that he can attack Israel when Naaman comes back without a cure. That's when a man named Elisha catches wind of all of this. He's a prophet, which is someone who speaks to the people on behalf of God. And Elisha hears about it, and he sends word that Naaman should come and see him. So Naaman pulls up outside Elisha's house, and there's no guard of honor, and there's no welcome party. Elisha doesn't even come outside. He just sends a servant to go outside and say, go down to the Jordan, wash 7 times. A little Bible study tip for you. Anytime the Bible mentions the words up or down relating to a character, you should pay attention to those. That's telling you a little bit of the trajectory that that character might be on. And for Naaman, he starts on the very top. He's a man of prominence and power, but he's on his way down. He's forced down to Israel, forced to listen to a slave girl, forced to go down to bathe not once but 7 times in this Jordan River, which is apparently not as nice as the rivers he has back home. He's forced down to his knees in desperation. I wonder if there is anyone here who can relate to Naaman's experience. Maybe you've been searching and trying all sorts of remedies for the deep longings you have to be healthy, to have a flourishing life. And it's like no matter what you try, it's kind of like you're in quicksand. Every movement you take just feels like it pulls you deeper and deeper into trouble. Or maybe, like Naaman, you've achieved and attained so much in your life. You've chased, and then when you finally reached the things that you were looking for, you found that it's still not quite enough, that you were still lacking, that whatever it is that's wrong underneath the surface, deep down, despite all of the striving, you feel yourself falling apart and cannot stop the rot. Maybe you found some sort of fulfillment or contentment a long time ago, but then one day you looked up and you looked around, and either in an instant or over a long season, you now look around and realize all the contentment you had is gone. See, for Naaman, it's at the intersection of his dire desperation and the collapse of his capability where all he has left is need. But it's at this place that Naaman not only finds healing for his leprosy, but that he also meets God. See, it's through the humbling and painful external experiences that Naaman finds himself in, that his internal self is actually brought to life. The late pastor Timothy Keller synthesizes this moment in the narrative this way. He says, the only way to meet God is this: all you need is need. All you need is nothing. But most people don't have it. See, Naaman comes to Israel saying, I have so much to offer. Name what I have to do. Name the price for my cure. I'm worth saving. But Naaman had to learn that it wasn't about what he brought to the table. It was actually a lot more. For this God, it's all about what Naaman needed, which was a healing experience with the God of grace. Not just for his circumstance, not just for his skin, but for his soul, for his whole person. Friends, we live in a country where independence is a virtue at a time where individualism is a celebrated pursuit. So success and flourishing in our day looks like getting to a point in your financial or professional or emotional or even increasingly so relational lives where you don't have to rely on anyone else and you can comfortably take care of you and your own without any worry. And if you can get there by making a name for yourself along the way, then all the better. What I'm not saying is that comfort is a bad thing morally. That's not what I'm saying here. But man, it is amazing how much our own competence, our plans for the future, our need for security, our refusal to trust other people because of their unpredictability, how much those things can rob us of an opportunity to meet God through how he shows up for us in our moments of need, when we really need him. It's in our most desperate seasons of life that what's underneath the surface comes to the top, where we see what our souls really look like, that we experience what author Annie Diller said, which was that all that summer conceals, winter reveals. All we need is need, but most people don't have it. Naaman does, and it's there, at the edge of despair and the end of his rope, out of options and empty all hope, lathered in mud and wholly undone, flesh is refreshed and spirit made young. See, Naaman's experience washing in the Jordan, he has an encounter there with the living God who heals not just his skin but his soul. And interestingly, this internal change that Naaman experiences on this day at the healing waters brings about significant change in his external world as well. The story goes on this way. It says, "So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him, and his flesh was restored, and he became like that of a young boy." Then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and said, "Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. So please accept a gift from your servant." But the prophet answered, "As surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing." And even though Naaman urged him, he refused. "If you will not," said Naaman, "please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry. For your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but the Lord. May the Lord forgive your servant for this one thing. When my master enters the temple of Rimmon to bow down, and he's leaning on my arm, and I have to bow there also, when I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this." "Go in peace," Elisha said. If your eyes glazed over for a second while we were reading that text, it's okay. If you're thinking, "Josh, you said this passage was relatable," don't worry, we're going to get there. Just stay with me for a sec. So first up in this little section, we see a wild declaration from Naaman. He says, "Now I know there is no God in all of the world except in Israel." See, Naaman's encounter with God has changed his thinking, right? Notice he doesn't say, "Now I know your God is better than mine." He does not say, "Now I know the Jordan is not as stinky as I thought it was," right? He says, "This God is the one. Now I know." Then he offers Elisha the prophet money as a thank you, showing that his heart is beginning to change as well as his mind. He's becoming generous. But Elisha rejects the gift because he wants it made abundantly clear. This God, the God of healing, is not a God who does miracles for hire. Grace is only grace if it is offered freely to the recipient. And so instead, Naaman says, "Can I at least have a bunch of dirt to take home?" Put that on your Christmas list this year, right? Historians and theologians explain that as the military commander and the overall number 2 in his home country, Naaman would have gone with the king into their pagan temple to worship. The king would regularly go there to sit and to pray and to stay in the temple, and his number 2 would have been required to go with him to escort him there to worship and to bow down with him. And he would lower the king to the ground, and he would help him back up when he was kneeling. But while Naaman, that's the life that Naaman is going back to. But while Naaman is going back to his life, he's not going back to his way of life. Because it's not just his head and his heart that have changed as a result of this moment, this encounter with God. See, Naaman is becoming someone new. This is changing his will as well. And so he says, "I'm going back to that world. I'm going back to Syria, but now I worship the God of Israel. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take some dirt from Israel, and every time I have to bow down, I'm going to put that dirt under my knees so as to signify I'm still worshiping the God of Israel as if I'm in Israel today." Now, we'll come back to Naaman in just a minute, but there's another character who now comes into this story, a man named Gehazi. And in this narrative, Gehazi is a little bit the opposite of Naaman. So while Naaman begins on top with all of this like pomp and circumstance and importance, Gehazi is a servant in the house of Elisha. He's probably an apprentice to the prophet. So you could say he's kind of like an unpaid church intern, okay? So this unpaid church intern, Gehazi, His journey is not one in his own mind that he thinks is downward. He thinks he's on sort of like an upward path. And not only that, he's really happy to go about this upward path at the expense of other people. And in doing so, Gehazi misses God entirely. After Elisha turns down Naaman's financial gift, the passage says that Gehazi, the intern, he's furious. In verse 20, it says that after Naaman had traveled some distance, Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said to himself, "My master was too easy on Naaman, this Aramean." That's racism, by the way, just so you know. Gehazi believes that Naaman is less than him and deserves mistreatment, and that he's justified in taking from Naaman simply because he's Aramean. That's what's happening here. So he says, I'm going to go after him, this Aramean, by not accepting from him what he brought. That's what he's mad about. As surely as the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something from him. Interesting that he evokes God's name as justification for going after him. I think all of us have a little bit of Gehazi somewhere buried in our hearts. It's that voice that says, you deserve this. You've done everything right and no one notices you. It's time you take for yourself. It's that voice that says, well, God wants you to be happy, so do what you need to do to get to that place. It's that pull to ruthlessly climb the ladder, socially, financially, professionally, maybe even on behalf of your kids, pushing others out of the way to secure the very best for them. I think, by the way, in the Menlo Park School District, students don't find out who their teachers are till like the day before classes start. And I think it's because of all of these parents who have little Gehazis in them who will call the school and be like, I want the best teacher for my kid. I think that's what's going on. That's the reason that they do that. Just an aside there. Usually, the pull toward upward mobility is one that is, at the very least, it's in tension with the way of God. The way of God, which always moves downward in self-giving humility. But Gehazi, he sees the life that Naaman has, this evil, pagan, diseased man, and he thinks to himself, I deserve what he has. I deserve that. And so he chases after him. When he gets to him, he makes up a story about how there's 2 new interns who came into town, and so Elijah actually needs the money after all. So could you please, he sent me to say, could you please give me the money? And so Naaman, who's becoming radically generous as a result of the radical generosity of God in his life, he joyfully gives the money. Gehazi takes it home, he hides it like under his bed, and then when he runs into Elisha says, where have you been? And Gehazi says, I was here the whole time. What are you talking about? And then, in the biggest plot twist of the story, Elisha rebukes Gehazi, he condemns him, and in the last verse of the narrative, he curses him to have the same leprosy that Naaman had. Yeah. So goes the logic of Elisha. Gehazi, if you so desperately want to have the life of Naaman, then so be it. You envy Naaman and his status and his influence and his resources so much, you can have his lot. You can have his leprosy. It's an extraordinary reversal. Naaman, the broken man with leprosy and a rotting heart, may now worship the God of Israel in a temple, and Gehazi, the active church participant who knew and said and did all of the holy things, now has leprosy and is falling apart. This passage is telling us what eventually happens to anyone, church intern or otherwise, who prioritizes their external lives and circumstances at the cost of their internal life. It tells us what happens to people who cannot recognize their need for God's grace and be humbled by his healing waters. You know, something I love about this story is that the heroes are kind of incognito in this story. And they're people who don't just meet God, they give us a foretaste as to who Jesus is. They mirror Jesus with their very lives. And really quickly, they pop up 3 times. The first one is in verse 2, where we see this incredible Jewish girl who, even though she's a slave in Naaman's house. Naaman, whose army possibly killed or sold off her entire family, this young girl still points this man towards healing and hope and humility. She shows true grace, exhibiting ultimate, self-giving, sacrificial love, just like Jesus. Then there's Naaman's servants in verse 13, right, who talk some sense into him after his pride almost gets in the way of him getting the cure that he came to Israel for. They're like, if they told you to slay a dragon, you would have done it. Why are you being so proud about this small ask? And then we see Jesus mirrored in Naaman himself, who, if you remember, he receives the salvation of God and then becomes like that of a young boy. He gives generously of his fortune for the people who are trying to take advantage of him. He walks into a land that does not know the God of Israel, and he proclaims, there is no other God who saves. Friends, this gives us a glimpse into who Jesus is. To those who are worried, who are afraid, who are unsure or hurting, who feel alone or brokenhearted, who feel their time has long passed or that they are unequipped to face what is in front of them. Jesus is God himself who draws near to those people. And to those who have it all worked out, who have achieved and ascended and attained all that the world has to give and yet still find themselves lacking. Somehow they are desperately in need. Jesus is God who draws near to those people, to you and to me. And by necessity, when you and I meet God, when we have a true encounter with him, that God of nearness, we begin to be shaped into his image and to mirror him ourselves. Like Naaman, our head, our heart, and our will, they begin to become like Jesus. That is where the fullness of life comes from. That's the change that Naaman experiences. And friends, this is not just an individual thing. It's collective. So those of us who are being shaped into his image, for us, our mission collectively as the church is to become a place or a people of healing waters, where the weary and the needy who have come to the end of their rope and are longing, whether they know it or not, for this encounter with Jesus, we are a place of refuge for them. Could you imagine for just a second, what if part of what it means to be the church, especially in our area and especially in our time, is to be a place of healing water for people who have chased after independence and individualism and found themselves exhausted by the constant inundation of pressure and expectation that comes with being alive today. Like, what if we as a people were people who the weary found rest in? Where the weary could find an interdependent, an interconnected community of fellow needy people who were committed to each other's flourishing. Not just to falling for the internal Gehazi who says, get ahead at all costs. Like, what if we were a people, we as a group, who when the hurting in our community are looking for somewhere to belong, we could show them goodness and beauty and truth? What if we were a people who went to those who were hurting? There's a group of artists in Paris who use ceramic mosaics to repair cracks in masonry. They quite literally go to the broken places of this world and they fill them with goodness and beauty and truth. They give them meaning and purpose. They are healing waters to their community. Friends, this is a picture of who you and I together are meant to be. This is the vocation and the mission, the joy of the church, to partner with God in bringing healing waters to our world, as Jesus has done for us. to help make it young again. I love thinking about Naaman going back to his home, to a land where no one knows the true God, and every day rolling up his sleeves and literally getting his hands dirty so that he can proclaim, I am a needy man who has been changed. This is the invitation for us as a church community. Let's be healing waters. And may Christ's kingdom come on Menlo Park, on earth, as it is in heaven. Would you pray with me? Lord, it's an unspeakable gift to know that even at our very worst, you offer us healing and a place of belonging and a purpose and a mission. So I ask that you would stir our hearts, you would stir our spirits, that we would think about, that we would be convicted by what it looks like to be your people on mission here in our community. God, would you give us such a clear picture of who we were and who you're making us to be, that it fuels our interactions with others. And God, would this church, New Community Church, be a place where those who are wondering what in the world life is all about, that they would find healing, belonging, and direction here. Thanks for loving us. In Christ's name, amen.